Hello everybody and welcome back to the Healthy Orange Movie Reviews. I'm your host, Bennett Campbell Ferguson, and I am so glad that you are with me and watching today, because this video marks the end of a very long journey. Months ago, I began recording a series about my favorite films of the first decade of the new millennium, all 10 of my favorites, and now it is coming to its conclusion with this video, which is about Bryan Singer's superhero sequel, X2. So if you've been with me since the beginning, or if you're just joining me now, either way, thank you for being a part of this increasingly crazy saga. But let's get right down to business. X2 came out in 2003, and it was a sequel to the 2000 film X-Men, which was based on a Marvel comic book about a team of mutant superheroes. They're, unlike Spider-Man, they didn't gain their powers through accidents. They were simply born with them. And because of that, they're considered abominations and hated and feared by society, and they're outcasts. But in the film, the X-Men, these superheroes, make the choice not to strike back against the people who hate and fear them, but to protect them and help them in the hope that one day mutants and regular humans can all unite and come together as one, presumably. Now, X-Men was a very, in a lot of ways, a small film in light of some of the really gargantuan, crazy, out-of-control blockbusters we've seen in recent years. Watching the first X-Men film, you might be very surprised how small it is. There's very few fight scenes. The film is relatively short. It's under 2 hours. And it's quiet. There's not a lot of explosions and craziness. There's one explosion, but it's just a truck. It's not a building or anything. It's a little movie. And Bryan Singer, directing the movie, he was entering new territory after doing smaller thrillers like his first 3 films, Public Access, the Oscar-winning The Usual Suspects, and After People. So it makes sense that he might want to do something a little more intimate and low-key as he was stepping into the realm of blockbusters and superhero sagas. But that all flew out the window with X2, which is one of the most massively epic films I have ever seen. It's over 2 hours, and it's packed with massive snowy vistas and huge sweeping battles and all kinds of chaos and drama and tragedy. And as a result, it overwhelms you and overpowers you. But as I've often talked about before, that's what I want from a movie. That's what I think we all need in some ways. A movie that's gonna consume us for a period of time and deeply move us. And that's exactly what X2 does. It begins from the very beginning. It strives to do this. We get a frantic scene in the White House where a renegade mutant attempts to assassinate the President of the United States. He's a fictional president invented for the movie, although there are certainly some who may interpret him as sort of an on-screen avatar for George W. Bush. But that's all rather vague and ambiguous because he is a fictional character. But this mutant attempts to kill the president, and we get this crazy scene of him leaping and jumping through the White House's halls and all this wild camera movement between doorways with guards running, and then in the background Mozart's Requiem is playing, and it's a motif in Mr. Singer's movies. They often will throw some classical music into a scene and that produces kind of a strange, weird effect. And here you'll definitely recognize it as a piece of music that's not written for the film, because, you know, it sounds like a piece of classical music written by Mozart. It doesn't sound cinematic necessarily in the way we usually think of the term. And yet it's with the choir in Mozart's piece, the kind of rage and intensity, it feels perfectly in sync with the film, and it sets the tone for this what is going to be a very brutal and devastating experience. But soon the dust clears. We get a brief interlude in the snow in Canada where Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman, the hero of the movie, is looking for some secrets to his past. And then we return to the school that is the home of the X-Men. And we see them in this dark, shadowy room, wondering what this assassination on the attempt on the president is going to do for the mutant cause. Is it going to turn everyone against mutants? And so we can begin to feel fear and conspiracy taking shape, and it reminds me a bit of the beginning of Attack of the Clones, actually, which is another sci-fi film that I have a soft spot for. But needless to say, in X2, those feelings of fear mounting are a bit more potent, because Mr. Singer is a masterful filmmaker when it comes to darkness. The early films he made were very cynical and pessimistic about the world, and ultimately he improved his filmmaking style by embracing a sort of sincerity and tenderness and sweetness that's very much a part of the X-Men films. But he never lost his capacity to see the darkness in humanity, the brutality, really. And as X2 goes along, things get even more brutal. You won't believe how brutal they get. You may think that The Dark Knight is the darkest superhero film of all time, but you may change your mind after watching X2, or you may decide to tie between the two, because things get incredibly grim. At the school where the X-Men make their home, there are a lot of young students, young mutants that they're training, and we get a horrific sequence in which the United States military storms the school and shoots the students with toxic darts to knock them out so they can kidnap them. And it's god awful watching these children being shot by soldiers. I mean, they're not killing anybody, granted, but it's still horrific to see a young boy lying on the floor with a dart in his neck. It's just the first time I watched the movie, I was groaning. I was so sickened by what I was watching on screen. Whereas now I watch it in a more detached state, where I'm, going, wow, that Bryan Singer, he's a genius. He films horrible things happening, but he does it so masterfully, which, funnily enough, is often the reaction that I think a lot of us have to great films. But no matter. The point is that X2 is very much about the mutants and the X-Men being in a vulnerable position, being hunted. We see a couple of them, led by Mr. Jackman's Wolverine, running out of the mansion, escaping in their pajamas, no less, and going on the run and being pursued across the United States. We get a really poignant sequence in a suburban neighborhood in Boston, and then we see them hiding out in the woods, and finally we find them going into the depths of this snowy military base, where the movie comes to a really scarring climax. So that's what separates this film, what separates X2 from the first X-Men film. The first movie was very much about conflicts between mutants, between the mutants who wanted to deal with humans peacefully and the others who wanted to just wipe them all out and essentially make mutants the ruling class of the entire world. Whereas X2 is a much simpler story. It's about humans striking out against mutants. It's not about a clash of ideology. It's about hatred and cruelty and the X-Men and their fight to survive. And it's funny, you would think that that would be less interesting. It's a much simpler conflict. It's simple battle. It's a simple war of trying not to be killed. And yet it's so much more potent. The kind of primalness, the simplicity of the conflict makes it more emotionally powerful.